agreement to suspend certain standing orders which are impractical to comply with at a remote council meeting. The relevant orders are 6.2 in relation to singing the national anthem, 20.8 in relation to the requirement for amendments to motions being written down and handed to the Chief Executive, 22.3 in relation to voting by a show of hands, 24.1 in relation to the requirement for councillors to stand to speak, 27 in relation to the requirement for councillors to sign the attendance book. Does the council agree that these standing orders be suspended for the duration of this meeting?
Agreed.
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 Thank you, members. We'll now take item 1, apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Apologies have been received from Councillors Helen Harvey, Councillor Mitchell and Councillor Noble.
Do councillors have any other apologies to give?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, forgive me, has an apology been given for Councillor Smith-Ainsley?
I did, sorry, just to come in now, I did send his apologies to you, Daniel, on your voicemail.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll take that. Apologies from Councillor Smith-Ainsley. Thank you. Item 3, disclosures of interest. Do any councillors have any disclosures of interest in relation to the matters which are to be considered at this meeting?
No.
We'll now move to item 3, the motion. This extraordinary meeting was called to consider a motion which was signed by 5 members in accordance with Standing Order 7.1D and is set out on the agenda. May I remind councillors that all speeches during any debate on this motion are limited to 5 minutes each. I call on Councillor Beardsmore to propose the motion. Councillor Beardsmore.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And to start with, I am requesting a named vote on this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
This is a very emotive issue, and it's not about politics and bandwagons and personal agendas and posturing. It's not about all the things that we councillors know and love. It's actually more important than that. It's actually about a cover-up. It's about a tragedy and the cover-up which attends that tragedy. And what I think people need to know, because we know this case has had national coverage, is that this is our case.
Councillor Beardsmore, could I just stop you there? Could you first of all, for the benefit of the councillors, read out the motion and then you'll have your opportunity to speak afterwards.
Okay. Can I go back, because this is one thing I haven't got up in front of me.
Thank you.
Hang on. Oh, blimey, let's find it. Right, hang on. Okay, Mr. Mayor. This council is deeply concerned that the tragic events surrounding the death of 7-year-old Zane Bangbola and the paralysing of his father have not been adequately dealt with. The tragedy occurred during the floods of 2014 when the old waste site behind the family's house was inundated with water. We believe crucial evidence on the potentially toxic nature of the site has been ignored. The recent claims of dumping of toxic waste behind the house by a nearby military institution only serves to make it more important than ever that the truth behind this terrible incident be uncovered. To this end, within 14 working days, this council resolves to 1. Write to the Secretary of State for the Home Department in the strongest possible terms, expressing its deep unease and anger at the way the issue has been dealt with so far. 2. Call for an immediate full independent panel inquiry, similar to Hillsborough, into the tragedy and all the events surrounding it. 3. This letter to the Secretary of State be open to be signed by the leaders of all political groups on Spelthorne Council. 4. The letter is featured prominently on the Spelthorne Council's website and the intendant council publicity.
Thank you, Councillor. Is the motion seconded?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Bateson seconding the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Batesman. Do you wish to reserve your right to speak?
Yes, please, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I call on Councillor Beardsmore to speak to the motion.
Okay, many thanks. I won't say what I've already said. I won't repeat it. This is a tragedy, and the cover-up that surrounds it, and that's where the distaste lies. And I think it's important for most of us to recognise, or all of us to recognise, this happened in our patch. Zane was one of our residents. He lived in Spelthorne. His father, who was permanently paralysed, is still a Spelthorne resident. This isn't a tweet N times down the line or something we've heard about on Facebook. This is here, now, with us. And for those who don't know the nature of Spelthorne, and most of us do, Spelthorne is 20% underwater. It is covered with waste sites and old gravel sites. It's where we live. Nobody in Spelthorne lives more than 2 miles from a site similar to the one that killed Zane. This is something we all live with, and it could have been any one of us. I'm going to deal with the facts of this matter. And it's not the facts actually that are the core of the issue. It's the way the facts were used, not used, or misused in the inquest. And that is where the anger lies, that so much important evidence, so many facts, so many statements were either ignored or simply not allowed to be presented. And I think one of the things I found difficult in talking to people about this issue is that people do not understand the power of a coroner to direct an inquiry like this. And there have been many miscarriages of justice, from Stephen Lawrence to Hillsborough, and many sad instances in between. And really, we don't want ours to go on any longer than is really necessary, for the sake of the family, for the sake of justice, and for the sake of all our residents. I'm going to deal basically just 3 incidents at this stage where the facts have had a problem. Actually, I've just turned the camera off. I hadn't realised. This, you probably can't see it properly. This is the incident report. It's a copy of the summary page of the incident report, written by senior fire and police staff on the day. The important thing of that, the only dangerous gas recorded in, quote, high quantities was hydrogen cyanide. Nothing else, only hydrogen cyanide. The report also quotes that Zane died. It also reports that Cobra were to meet at 5 o'clock. That is how important this was. Cobra met at 5 o'clock to discuss this issue. This report was not accepted by the coroner. More importantly, is there are 5 more pages to this report. They are 100% redacted, and even to this day, despite repeated requests, every other page in this report remains secret. What are they hiding? Mr. Mangola made his medical record available to the coroner and to the public, and again, this is a copy. And I'll read it, just the first line. It says, rhabdomyolysis. Now, that is the formal name for the severe muscle wastage that Mr. Bangola now suffers and why he's in a wheelchair. Rhabdomyolysis 6 months ago due to hydrogen cyanide poisoning. That's what the consultant said 6 months after the event. No ifs, no buts, no maybes. Simple, black and white, medical fact. Mr. Bangola is now in a wheelchair because of hydrogen cyanide. This report was in the body of evidence submitted to the coroner. He chose not to call it, and indeed he actually wrote to the consultant saying it wasn't necessary to include it. We then have something else. We know Porton Down were called in to examine this site. Now, Porton Down are not called in because of carbon monoxide on a faulty pump.
Councillor Beardsmore, you have 30 more seconds.
Okay, very briefly, they're not called in for that. They're called in for hydrogen cyanide. The coroner did not even call their evidence. There is also a lot of evidence about the pump. As I've run out of time, I will let Councillor Bateson deal with that later. But a lot of the statements about the pump and it's being faulty and all this lot, a lot of those statements don't stack up either. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I now call on Councillor Bateson as a seconder to speak to the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am fully in supportive of Councillor Beardsmore's motion. I would just like to comment as follows. Spelthorne have informed all councillors in the last few days of what was the coroner's official verdict, something the council are obliged to take notice of. That said, there are serious questions concerning the evidence the coroner selected to form the basis of his findings and verdict. It is a belief that in reaching his decision, serious omissions of further evidence took place. And I'll just give some examples of this. One, the fire service specifically stated in their report that there was clear evidence of the presence of very high levels of HCN. This claim was backed up in subsequent media coverage, but discounted by the coroner. Two, the finding that it was carbon monoxide that was the cause of Zane's death has no evidence base. In addition, Zane's father's medical record states unequivocally that HCN is the cause of his paralysis. The coroner refused to accept his medical record as evidence. Three, there is much controversy surrounding the use or not of the pump. The coroner stated that it had been run until it was dry of fuel. When this pump was handed to the Health and Safety Executive for examination, it still contained fuel in sufficient quantity for it to be run again on not one but two separate occasions. This contradicts the coroner's statement. The same HSE examiner also stated that had carbon monoxide been present in sufficient quantity to cause harm, it would have lingered for sufficient enough time for it to have been measured. The HSE statements were made under oath and are on record as such. The increase in carbohemoglobin was quoted in the background briefing we received as councillors. The pathologist admits he was not an expert in CO poisoning. A comparison is perhaps COVID and flu symptoms. They can on the surface look the same until examined by an expert. The pathologist was not an expert, but perhaps a telling statement was that he had tailored his report to fit the coroner's brief. This would strongly suggest a high element of prejudgment. To lose a loved one is bad enough at any time in your life. To lose a young son in the way Kai and Nicole did, we cannot begin to contemplate. They rightly and understandably seek justice and feel there are justifiable reasons to re-examine the case openly and without prejudice. The powers that be do not always get things right. Gosport Hospital, Stephen Lawrence has been mentioned, and perhaps notably Hillsborough, are testimony to that. Tonight, I ask all councillors to show their support to the family by backing this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. Thank you. Now I call on a supporter of this motion, Councillor Seaver. Would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you. This tragedy occurred in 2014, and 6 years later, Kai and Nicole Gangbola are still clamouring for justice and the right to an independent panel inquiry. Zane has been denied an Article 2 human rights compliant inquest with a jury. Article 2 of the European Convention of Human Rights states that any citizen should be able to access an independent, practical and effective investigation of the facts of any death. As stated in the motion, there is a litany of evidence on the toxic nature of the landfill site. As we all know, a recent BBC report has revealed that a former Ministry of Defence engineer claimed that subcontractors working for a tank research facility dumped chemical waste in gravel pits around Chertsey, including behind the family's house. The whistleblower told the BBC the chemicals had been put into drums that rusted and corroded over the years, allowing chemicals to leach into the ground. Environmental consultant Paul Mobbs has stated that until regulations changed in the 1990s, drums of waste would be buried alongside other landfill. Last year, planning documents submitted by ESSO for an aviation fuel pipeline revealed that boreholes were drilled into the Lavenders landfill site in 1972, but in one borehole, the drilling, quote, appeared to strike a metal canister which released a substance at effervescence with water in the borehole and gave rise to an obnoxious smell. Clearly, the land must be independently tested. Furthermore, evacuation of the area for several weeks, the immediate presence of Porton Down, emergency COBRA meetings, decontamination units, a pop-up hospital, the use of chemical suits exposes a strong possibility that toxic chemicals were released as a result of the flooding. To clarify, evacuation due to carbon monoxide poisoning would last no more than a day. As Councillor Bateson and Councillor Beardsmore have stated, the fire services hazmat detected the nerve agent hydrogen cyanide in the Gangbola's home. Kai Gangbola has been left paralysed and his diagnosis was paraplegic poisoning by hydrogen cyanide. The Fire Brigade Union has unanimously approved a motion for support for Zane's campaign and its call for an independent panel inquiry. 51 MPs have signed an early day motion calling for an independent panel inquiry. It is utterly scandalous that Spelthorne Borough Council, who represent the Gangbolas, has thus far not supported their call for an independent panel inquiry. No coroner is infallible, as we know from Hillsborough, Stephen Lawrence and Gosport Hospital, and there is crucial evidence that must be seen and heard in an IPI. A little boy has died and his father left paralysed. It is absolutely mandatory that the Council support this motion this evening and demand an independent panel inquiry into Zane's death. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Seaver. I now call on Councillor Saligopoulos. Councillor, you need to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I absolutely support this motion and I thank the 5 councillors and the proposer and seconder. And of course, Mr. Mayor, I remember this well, this terrible situation. From the coroner's report, Mr. Mayor, which I've been looking at, and it's quite lengthy, but it's also, it's actually quite upsetting when you read it, especially as you come to more or less the penultimate paragraph where the coroner is, kind of intimating that the family were to blame for this. That, to me, is wholly wrong. On page 28, Mr. Mayor, of the coroner's report, item 44, if anyone has it in front of them, what struck me, and I'm not going to repeat anything that anyone else said, and indeed what Seaver was saying was extremely interesting, but when the EA on the day decided to do some testing at the house, they wanted to go into the basement and look for the presence of HCN, and that was about 1640 hours. Now, remember, after 8 o'clock that morning, the chief fire officer had said that everything was okay and it was safe for someone or anybody to enter the house. What's interesting was when the EA were going to have a look about 1640 hours, 2 Surrey Fire and Rescue staff members turned up about 7 o'clock, according to the coroner's report, to assist in collecting the water samples. Now, what struck me was, and go back to what I said, the chief fire officer had said at 8 o'clock that morning, no, it's all clear, there's no evidence of cyanide or anything like that. How come those fire officers turned up in full hazard gear? Now, there may be a very good explanation for that, but I do find that strange, because they had apparently been briefed that it was safe to go into the house. And the coroner also kept on about, oh, it was unfortunate the way it was reported and the confusion with the EA, and kind of looked to point the blame on the evidence of the EA employees. And then I take you back to what I just said, that he also tried to blame the misinformation that was apparently given to the EA's members who took the water sample, that it was the fault of a junior fire officer. But as Mr. Beardsmore said quite rightly at the beginning, so much of that report has been redacted that we're not able to actually prove this. Finally, Mr. Mayor, what I would also say is how terrible that parents would have to wait 2 years to bury their child. And that is what I think, Mr. Mayor, makes me want to support this motion, because I think we need to get to the bottom of this and to clear our name as a council. But I'm sure we do in good faith, but we can't leave it like this. It has to be dealt with. So I'm very happy to support this motion, and thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, thank you, Councillor. I now call on Councillor Ian Harvey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As many of you will be aware, I have mixed views on this particular case. Having said that, and having seen some of the concerning issues that have been presented of recent, it is my view that we now do need to call upon a further and independent investigation. Let's be clear, this is not something that Spelthorne Council are being blamed for. The dumping, if indeed there was dumping, is alleged to have happened in 1971, 4 years before Spelthorne were formed. The motion does not require any expenditure by Spelthorne. The serious concerns do need to be explored. And I would just finally like to say this. Most of us present tonight are parents. Some of you know that I've got my youngest son, Gideon. Indeed, some of you know Gideon is of a very similar age to, or was a similar age to Zane when he died. And if it was us, and if it was our son or daughter, would we not be desperate to have a final independent investigation to clarify once and for all what the situation was and the truth of the matter? Therefore, I wholeheartedly endorse the motion brought by Councillor Beardsmore. I will be supporting it, and I respectfully ask everybody else to do so. I do not see a reason why we would not support this. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. I now call on Councillor Dorfell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Green Party is fully in support of the demands and the motion. We've supported the Gabangwola's family since the very beginning, and we think it is high time for a full independent inquiry. The family has been fighting tirelessly for the last 6 years, and not only is it painful enough for them to lose a son, but to be left in limbo knowing that there hasn't been a full and fair inquiry is even more painful, in addition to what has been mentioned before, the fact that they have then found themselves being blamed for his death, a terrible fate that one wouldn't even want to imagine or wish on one's worst enemies. So I think it's high time to just say that we support the motion, and that it's high time that we all speak out strongly so that there is finally a full and fair process where there can then be no no doubting the outcome. That's why it's there. That's why even the process itself is very important, where both parties have an equality of arms, where full legal aid is granted, and where the family is fully represented. And that's why we also support the early day motion that's been brought and supported by 51 MPs. It's not a small matter. I think it's high time that this is done. And for Spelthorne to then stand up and argue against it reflects very badly on us. And I think it then reflects very badly because people will then say, well, what does Spelthorne have to lose that they cannot even endorse a full and fair inquiry? So I think for that reason and for the fact that it's high time we see justice, we all need to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I now call on Councillor Boardflower.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I totally support this motion. I don't think you have to be a parent to realise how sad this is. Absolutely everybody would feel any loss. I totally support this, and the group does, the Conservative group, and I'll be happy to sign the letter without fail. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Do any other members wish to speak? Councillor Beardsmore, do you wish to sum up?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I do wish to sum up, but above all, I would like to thank all the councillors across the board from all the parties and groups to have supported this motion. I had a lot of things prepared. I'm not going to say most of them because you, the councillors, have actually done the talking for us. More importantly, I think just to put the record straight, Spelthorne has actually never made a decision on this. When it did come before Spelthorne all those years ago, it was ruled out of order. We weren't allowed to discuss it. So as things stand at the moment, Spelthorne actually still hasn't got it wrong on this. And from everything I'm hearing, Spelthorne are going to get it right. And they're going to get it right first time. And that reflects well on all of us as councillors and well on all of us as an authority. We've got nothing to lose by having an independent inquiry to seek the truth. It's something we all want. It's in your guts. You know it's correct. So yes, I would like to thank everybody for supporting this motion who has. And let us hope that the government take note or start to take note. Many thanks to everybody.
Thank you, Councillor Beardsmore. Councillors, I will now put the motion to the vote. I will ask the Chief Executive to call the members. Sorry. We shall now move to a recorded vote. I will call upon the Chief Executive to explain the recorded vote procedure.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will call out the names of each councillor in alphabetical order who is present at this meeting tonight. When a councillor's name has been called, the councillor shall respond clearly with one of the following three responses: for, against, abstain. No other statement or clarification of the vote is required or should be made. The vote will be recorded by the head of corporate governance and then entered into the minutes. Councillor Boardflower, leader.
For the motion.
Councillor Attewell.
For.
Mr. Mayor, Councillor Barnard.
For.
Councillor C. Barrett.
For.
Councillor R. Barrett.
For.
Councillor Bateson.
For.
Councillor Beardsmore.
For.
Councillor Brar.
For.
Councillor Chandler.
For.
Councillor Dorfell.
For.
Councillor J. Doran.
For.
Councillor S. Duran.
For.
Councillor R. Dunn.
For.
Councillor S. Dunn.
For.
Councillor Fiddler.
For.
Councillor Gething.
For.
Councillor Gibson.
Sorry, audio problems. For.
Councillor Grant.
For.
Councillor Harman.
For.
Councillor I. Harvey.
For.
Councillor Islam. Councillor Islam.
For.
Councillor Lagden.
For.
Councillor Layton.
For.
Councillor Madams.
For.
Councillor Nichols.
For.
Councillor Rubinsky.
For.
Councillor Saliagopoulos.
For.
Councillor Sexton.
Sorry, for.
Councillor Sider.
For.
Councillor Seaver.
For.
Councillor Vincent.
For.
Thank you.
I can confirm that there are 31 votes for the motion, none against and none abstain. So therefore the motion is carried.
Thank you, everybody.
Well,
That's brilliant.
Well, thank you, councillors. That concludes the formal business of this council agenda. And I thank
I have
you.
a question. Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry, just a quick
I'm
question.
sorry we can't take any other questions.
It's only
because
about what happens now. It's nothing to do with the motion, just what happens after the motion now.
I'm sure the Chief Executive will give you a response. But I'd like to thank you all for your support to this motion.